Hello, everyone. This is Joe Boston with Real Estate for Life. Hope you're all doing well. Real estate in the Dallas Fort Worth area is actually dipping down a little bit. We're starting to see a lot more wholesale deals. And so, there's a lot more activity. A lot of you have heard of the strategy, the BRRRR strategy, which is buy, right? So you first have to buy the property, then rehab, then rent, and then refinance. Well, it's interesting that in the city of Dallas now they have actually restricted um, what the short-term rentals, and that was one of the strategies that we would actually have to place our with our birth strategy. You could actually take a house that you bought and rehab, and then you could also put it into a short-term rental position and then generate a lot more revenue. So Airbnb short-term rentals were hot and heavy, and I believe the number is right around 1,000 units in Dallas, something like that. And so it's real interesting because one of our sponsors at the Dallas Real Estate Investment Group that supports the Real Estate for Life is Gaylene Lonergan, which is with the Lonergan Law Firm. And so she reached out to me recently and said, "Hey, we really need to talk about what this means, not only from the standpoint of uh, people having short-term rentals, but from a real estate investment standpoint as well, and then the holistic approach of what does that mean going forward." So, I'd like to welcome Gaylene again.
Hi, Joe. Hi, everyone.
Hello. And so it was really nice that you reached out to talk about this because what we started to do as real estate investors when COVID and all these other external factors impacted our business was looked at how we could generate revenue even when the prices of homes escalated. And one of those ways of doing that were short-term rentals, right? Because then you could generate revenue sort of like a hotel. You could actually generate more revenue, that was the goal, than um, doing just a typical standard rental. And so all these people flocked to doing Airbnb and short-term rentals, and actually we actually had someone on our speaking circuit that came and talked to us about it and how it was going to revolutionize, the whole real estate investing arena. And it did, right, for a while, because I think it fit the niche of people that wanted to do hotels and have a business and not necessarily deal with tenants. They could go in and actually manage the manager and have a crew. But recently, and I would like you to expand on this, the city of Dallas ruled, from what I read, that they were going to stop allowing people to have short-term rentals. Is that true?
Well, partially true. There's a lot more restrictions now than there were before. And Joe, this has kind of been bubbling under the surface for some time here in Dallas. Um, and there's really two things that are driving this ordinance now that the city of Dallas has passed. The one and foremost was that the city government, was losing out on the hotel and occupancy tax that has to be paid when someone stays in a hotel. That's 9%. Okay. So the Airbnb owners were not paying any hotel or occupancy tax. So that was what was driving the city government to be looking at it. And then the other thing is that the Airbnbs that are in residential neighborhoods, excuse me, a few bad apples spoil the whole basket. Okay, and the neighborhoods, especially when they're neighborhoods of people like me, elderly people like me, um,
Yeah, right.
that are at their house a lot, they they started getting a little, bent out of shape about what was taking, their neighborhood that was a nice, quiet residential neighborhood now had, parties going on and this and that and whatever. And so those are the two things that kind of drove it. And so the day that the city council met, that meeting lasted from the morning all the way till after midnight before they reached a decision. They had so many
Wow.
people commenting. They're commenting. They had the Airbnb owners. They had the residential, the neighbors and whatnot. And so what Dallas came up with is they now have banned short-term rentals in any neighborhood that is zoned single family residential. And there's a lot of those. Okay.
That's the majority of right where people live. So that pretty much restricts a lot of what we were doing, right? Because I guess the model was again to buy, but it was typically a single family residence,
Right. Right.
rehab it, rent it, but the rental actual aspect of this was short-term rental or getting a traditional tenant in there to generate cash flow.
Right.
And so that impacts a lot of people that have those in the city of Dallas, correct?
I mean, they can go back to being regular landlords in those neighborhoods, but the income stream is, I believe, and you can speak to that more, significantly different
Correct.
between a
It
lot.
is.
Yeah, exactly. That's why Airbnb became so popular because of the income stream was you know miles more than a regular rental.
Well, just think about it, Gaylene. So if you on especially if there was an event. So on average, what I read, it's anywhere from $150 to $200 a night, right? So let's just go on the high end. Well, if you cap a rental right around $2,000 a month, well, let's even go to $2,500 a month.
Hmm.
That's only 10, that's 10 to 15 nights. So out
Right.
of a 30-day month, right? So
You
you could rent a property just, I mean, have it occupied for half the month and still make as much. So really that other half is all profit
all
compared to your traditional. And
right.
in addition to that, well, I would say this, you have expenses, so I don't want to negate that. But what you also have to think about is you're not really dealing with a traditional tenant. You're operating it as a business. So
Right.
that is a true business. But I think a lot of people were happy because they were migrating out of that traditional tenant
Right. They
arena.
didn't have to go fix the toilet in the middle of the night.
Right. But
Right.
also what I read though is to your point is there were so many complaints and there weren't any restrictions, meaning I
Correct.
think now the occupancy is you can only have a maximum of 12 people.
Right.
There's a noise ordinance.
Right.
There's all these things that are in place because what you said, there are people that are having parties, even places where I had rentals. They're like, I hope you're not going to do that, are you? Because, there'd be parties, even though in a lot of the services that allow you to do short-term rentals, there is like a deposit that they place, a damage deposit. But as well as I do, it wasn't significant enough to a lot of
Right.
times to offset some of the serious damages that were caused there.
Right.
Uh,
Right. It only takes a few neighbors in the neighborhood to get riled up, and then you got the whole neighborhood, you know,
right,
before you know it, all the neighbors are with them. And so, but you can still have short-term rentals in anything that is zoned multifamily or commercial. But even there, and when they say multifamily, they mean 20 units or more, not
right. And I think it's only 3% of those, right? Only like a certain
3%.
percent.
Right.
But that's good though, because now for you condos, the aficionados, if you now can start looking at condos, like you said, it's zoned, see, not zoned single family. So if it's multifamily, right? So if you
Yeah.
start to look at that, you can kind of
There could
interpret that in Dallas.
Yeah, there could be an
Uh,
opportunity there. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
they're right. And so I think there's an avenue. Now, are there other cities that are going on aboard
Oh,
with that or
oh yes, this is not an isolated Dallas thing. Um, Plano, for example, passed a law regarding short-term rentals back in December or January that goes in effect July 1st. And what that does is it put a moratorium on any new short-term rentals beginning July 1st, beginning 2 or 3 days from now. So all the existing Airbnbs are not affected. They don't
they're
have to shut down.
grandfathered?
Right.
Okay.
But there cannot be any new ones for 1 year. And that is just so Plano can study the whole issue. And a year from now, they're going to be coming up with their own type of ordinance like Dallas had. Okay.
Right, and how much they're going to charge you. And so
Right.
the city of Arlington, they charge you a $500 registration fee or business license
Right.
fee. And then same thing, you can only have so many occupants in there. There's a noise ordinance. And
Right.
it can only be in the if it's zone single family, it can only be in the entertainment district.
Ah, okay.
So you can't really do them outside of that. Uh, so that's one way they had been put in place restrictions, because it
Yeah.
was a free for all. I mean, literally, I remember a couple of years ago, I mean, people were just saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this because it makes sense, right?" When you look
Right.
at the numbers,
Right.
I was going, "Oh, I'm going to try this," and actually,
Everybody
I
wanted to
think I'm
try.
going to. What's that?
I said everybody wanted to try it. I was even too.
Right.
Yeah, and I
So
think Fort Worth is being sued. Fort Worth has an ordinance, and I believe the Airbnb and Verbo operators are now suing the city of Fort Worth, which is what will happen. There's already talk of lawsuits against Dallas by the Airbnb operators in Dallas over this new ordinance. That's the also the trend is the cities are beginning to pass these kind of ordinances, and the owners and operators of the Airbnbs are fighting back with lawsuits. And not only just the owners and operators. New York City has an ordinance, and the corporate Airbnb has sued them um, because in New York City, the revenue from Airbnb only is 85 million or above. And
wow,
so, yeah, right,
they want their share, right? It's
right,
not, yeah, they
yeah,
want their share of the pie.
right. So there's lawsuits going on about that. The lawsuits, it depends. I mean, it's based upon the argument that the government is essentially taking your property by making these, severe restrictions. And do they have the right to do that? Okay. And there's nothing that's come up for appeal or anything like that. They're all like kind of in their infancy. So we won't know for a year, for the maybe until the next year or so, what the courts have to say about this.
Right. So I do have properties in the entertainment district. So I was going to try that because it's right by the Cowboy Stadium. But what's interesting is the policing of this. So if you think about it, the real only way, because most of those platforms, because I've put some thought to this, most of the platforms that you have to list your properties on, the Airbnb sites, the different short-term rental sites, I'm pretty much that's the only way that you could get clients. I'm thinking because if you post it, then they'll be able to police where it's located, and then
Right.
they'll be able to take a deep dive into where you are. Because I'm like,
Right.
well, how would they know? But obviously, in that whole ecosystem, they're going to be able to find out if you're doing it. So
Right.
that's really, really interesting.
Right. Because you
Um,
have to, nearly all the cities are now requiring you to register. And so if you have one and if you don't register, I'm sure there's a significant fine if they find out you're doing it. Yeah.
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 So do you think it's going to get more stringent? So it's going to be more widespread, right? Because I think what's going to happen is I really like the Airbnb model because you have a lot more flexibility, especially with families. And
Hmm.
that's it'll be interesting to see what people what they say. But like when you go to New York, right? You can have a whole
Right.
townhouse or a studio and have your whole family and be in a neighborhood and walkable neighborhood and go and experience the city versus being in a hotel where you
Right.
basically have to pay for every single thing. So it's going to be interesting to see what the kickback is, and I'm sure that's why that meeting took so long, is
Oh, yeah.
because
There
there's
were
there's
heated arguments
pros and cons, right? There was a lot of arguments about, especially from us, right? So the
about
investors are always under fire. So
it.
whether
Right.
it's single family, we're always going to be under fire, right? When we're gentrifying the places. But I do see that you can't control. I think one of the issues too is that there was very little management. So when
Correct.
someone would actually um, go on the site and then schedule to stay at your location, the owners are not involved. Really and truly,
Right.
they're hands off. And I think when you don't have management, then you can run into those issues because really and truly in that model, once they stay there, and you can't have cameras there, by the way. I think you can only have cameras in certain places. Like you can't have cameras inside. I know that for a fact.
Right.
So you really are kind of barred from seeing what's going on,
Yeah.
right? So you can have
That's
cipher
right.
locks and stuff like that. So you can't really manage it. So it's real interesting to find out how you could really put restrictions on the people that are there because you really can't,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I think there, it's all in flux right now. I think it probably will ultimately settle where there's some restrictions and maybe fines for Airbnb owners if they're the people that stay there cause any any kind of trouble or whatever. I mean, I think it's going to settle out where there's still Airbnb, but there's more limitations on it. Okay. But what is interesting here in Texas is, I mean, I watch what our great legislature is doing down there in Austin during the session, and they
Mhm.
just passed a law in Austin, I mean, in the legislature that's going to go into effect across the state shortly, where the cities, and I mean, this is all a political thing, most of the cities in Texas are blue, nearly all of them, the big cities are blue. And most of the legislature is red. So they're really irritated, generally speaking, at the cities, particularly Houston. Oh, they are on Houston. So they passed a law, and Governor Abbott signed it that essentially says that if the state um, regulates anything, anything regarding regarding like uh, energy or real estate, or if they regulate anything, then the cities have no right to regulate anything on that. So this could be challenged by the state government. This Airbnb restrictions could be challenged by the state government as well.
Gotcha. So it could overrule
It could overrule
the
Dallas.
city of Dallas.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a brand new statute that was just passed, and I'm not saying it will, because, well, an example would be, a few years ago, Denton banned fracking. Do you remember that?
I do. Right.
And what happened? The legislature went and passed a law that said, no, you can't ban fracking.
Well, of course, it's natural gas, right? So
Right,
that's
right.
not going to
You
happen.
city can't
I
don't
mean,
have
that's like,
yeah, you don't have the
yeah,
authority to govern
yeah. You
your
can't drill
city.
for oil. Yeah, you're not gonna. Yeah, you can't. You can't
Yeah.
drill for oil over here. Yeah,
So this is
no.
kind of the same this is kind of along the same line, and I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but it is out there that there could be something like that because they said the whole point of passing that was so that cities couldn't restrict business in their particular city. That that's not a Texas thing. Okay. So that is something to kind of be aware of. And I believe that all these lawsuits, particularly this one in New York, I think those lawsuits could go all the way to the Supreme Court, and who knows what they would say.
Right, with what they're doing this day and age, right? But they've
Right.
been very active the
Yes.
last couple of days. It's interesting that's what's going to happen in Houston because Houston doesn't really have zoning. I mean, it's like
Right.
it's all over the place. So
Right.
I'm seeing some friends kind of comment on what's going to happen with Houston. Well, I
Well, the
don't
state
even know if they
legislature wants
know how would they. Yeah, there's no zoning,
right.
so they might be okay, except for like you said for the state, but intervening. But I think cities that aren't as regulated and have a lot of structure, I think are going to be privy to this because a lot of people that are in these suburbs that are newer, right? So you have all these areas that are popping up. They're people migrate to the suburbs.
Right.
Well, that's just where a lot of investors are putting these short-term rentals.
Right.
So they're going to ban against it, right? They're going to, especially if there's an HOA, they're not going to
Correct.
want that
That's
because that's
another
going to,
yeah. That's another
yeah,
issue with the HOA. They will probably ban, they could put that in their regulations when they first start developing the subdivision. So there's a lot of things that the investors are going to have to deal with and be cognizant of over the next few years about this
right.
Airbnb situation. Yeah.
And that's a good point too. Is when you do have, I think you'll be more profitable in an area if you can get one that is successful in an area like this where there are regulations. To be honest, because there's fewer, right?
Right.
Versus a Houston or an area like that, because I would think there'd be more of them there, right? Because it's
Right.
not regulated. I mean, that's a free for
Right.
all. I think that's
More
that's what
competition
happened.
there.
People
Right.
ramped up to do it. Yeah, so it'll be real interesting to see that. That's so different. I don't
Right.
know about San Antonio. I don't know how
Well, I
regulated
would
they
think
are.
they would have a lot because if they're an entertainment mecca, okay,
Correct. Yeah,
just like
that's true.
Arlington.
Right, right. That's true. But they're competing against the hotels, and that's what I'm saying is, you know, that's
Yeah,
that's what they're competing against, and they're not.
yeah,
But again, if
exactly.
they have business licenses, that's what Arlington did. So it's $500. So the thing is that I don't think that's a whole lot if you're doing it and it's just your single family residence that applies. I mean, you can make a lot of money, especially near the Cowboy Stadium,
Right,
near AT&T Stadium. So, my thing is to try it and see how that's going to work. So I'm actually in the process right now of trying to find furniture and doing all that stuff because it's a whole different world than just a standard rental. But when you do the numbers, it works, right? Because you can just rent it for half of the.
right.
But
I just
I'm
think
just
it's
waiting
gonna
for the city to say, oh, now it's $1,000.
right,
Oh, now it's $1,500.
right.
Now it's yeah. Because one
Well,
thing they did in Arlington is for people, you can't even park on the street during game days in Arlington.
really? Oh wow.
So yeah, if you're a property owner, if you don't park and what's interesting is I have one driveway, but normally my tenants would park on the street, but on game day they have to pull in because they don't allow you to
Oh,
pull. Mine's like
okay.
2 and 3 blocks away. But it's interesting they did that because what people were doing obviously is parking on the streets to avoid paying, $50 to $100 for parking.
Right.
So they just took that all together. Like there's no parking on the streets, even for the owner of the house. You can't even park in front of your own house.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
like you've got to be kidding.
Yeah. Well, I think
So,
I think we're in an era where the investor, you know, at least goes into the Airbnb business with their eyes open and what will be my possible plan B if the regulation clamps down on this, I think that's going to be really important.
what's so funny is I'm kind of reading some of the comments here, but you're right. I'll have an opportunity to get some furniture from some people that are not going to be able to do it at Dallas. That's hilarious. Um, yeah. So any of us that are looking for look, any of us that are looking for furniture or something, that's not gonna, hey, estate sales. There's gonna be a lot of opportunity for those. Oh man, that's hilarious.
Funny. Yeah. Well, I'm looking to take my
That's funny,
daughter
Eric.
and her boyfriend to Key West and rent an Airbnb or a Verbo that we could stay in for, a week or whatever. So I'm one of those I've been shopping all the Airbnb and Verbo sites to see what we could get in Key West. So I don't know.
Wow, that's amazing. So now that being said, do you think that more cities will adopt these regulations? I mean, even on the outskirts, do you
I
think
believe
that
they
it'll
will.
start to,
I
yeah,
believe they will. I believe in the short term, more cities will start to adopt these things. And then we already have the pushback with litigation and whatnot. And then, like I said, the state governments could even, I guess, at least in Texas, they could, log in. So for now, it's going to be in flux, and we're really not going to know how it's all going to end up, whether those regulations will be overturned or limited or whatever. But I do think more cities will try to do so. My primarily, hey, 10% hotel occupancy tax in Dallas, that's a lot of money to the city.
it is right. Yeah, that they're losing out on. But if
Right.
you can't do it, they're not getting. It's almost like
Well, that's true. They're losing
chicken
out if
or the
they
egg, right? So if
that's
people can't do it, then they're not getting that revenue anyway. So it's almost
right.
like if you can't do it, I can't, right? I'm not getting your money, so you can't
Right.
do it. So we're not.
Well, and
But
that's why
again,
I
it
think
is
that's why I think they'll backtrack a little bit because bottom line is the cities want to get that money. So
right.
I don't know that they'll pass as stringent as Dallas where you just can't have it in any single family residence.
So
And I think
so the
there's a good chance that they'll back off of that at some point.
so the definition of short-term rental is that, and I'll have to read this. Is it 90 days?
No, 30 days or less.
30 days? It's 30 days, right? So
Right.
okay. So if you exceed 30 days, then you don't meet that criteria.
That's correct.
Okay. So there's going to be some loopholes coming.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, people are already working. I'm sure people are already working trying to figure out how they can get around
how
all
they can look at a lease and go, okay,
right,
so if I have you lease it under my company name and I lease it for a longer term and then I just have people sublease it, right?
right. Well,
Oh, I
every
just came
time
up
there's a new law, there's a new cottage industry springs
right.
up,
So
right?
if I sublease, so if my company, I just came up with a theory. So if my company leases it for a month, but I sublease it, I still meet that they wouldn't know. So I'm sure they're going to crack down on that. But that would be an option, right? So I'm starting to think about, well, what would be a loophole to get, to meet that criteria? So if it's 30 days, I can rent out a place for, like I said, 30 days, but then I could sublease it short term.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, and like I
I'm
said,
just
it all going to
wondering,
have to be litigated, I believe.
So I'm just wondering because the first thing is we're always going to think about how we can be successful in this environment. So that's what I would think. But again, I'm sure there's going to be people like me that are on the city government and council that might rebut that. But I don't know if they're as good as us. But hey, we can get ahead of it.
Yeah,
That's what's so interesting is we're going to have to start migrating towards revenue models. And I talk about this, that's why I changed the group, because we have to be focused on projects but also generating revenue, because now if you look at the average purchase price, it's migrating up north of 180,000 for an investment property.
right.
And so if you're right around those price points, rentals, traditional rentals just don't work.
Won't
I mean,
work.
it's really tough for them to work, especially with property taxes, maintenance, your reserves. It just doesn't make sense to do that. Um, so what are you going to do with a single family home? Well, that was the answer, is
Right,
because then you can offset, just like with hotels, right? You can take the half the month or a week, and that's generating all profit.
right,
So I think for those of you that are out there that have rentals that were in Dallas, there's still going to be opportunities, like if you want to rent it out per room. So I know some people that do that. That's a revenue model, as well, just renting out by the room. Again, it can't be less than 30 days, but I know people who do that as well. So when you're talking about maybe not a short-term rental, but a different type of rental, actually looking under the umbrella of what you can do to make it a hybrid, right? Instead of just a short-term, to generate more revenue. Because even with the prices coming down some, it's not going to be there, back in the glory days when you and I met, when it's, oh, I'll just throw away that $65,000 house.
right,
Oh no, that's too high. 50,000. Oh no, you're trying to
right.
take advantage of me, right?
Mhm.
Now that's the rehab,
Right,
so um
right.
yeah, so it's interesting that they did this, but I think it's just because, one, there are so many complaints. I think two, if you look in Dallas, there's a lot of neighborhoods that were newer or rehabbed. Plano and Frisco, I can see that all day long, because I mean, one, those price points are a lot higher, but
Right,
two, I don't want to call them persnickety, but there's a lot of HOAs,
right, right. And you definitely have
Uh,
to factor in the HOA situation,
you
right?
know, yeah. So HOAs are not having it.
Right,
I live in one. I don't like them. A lot of us don't like them, except for when we don't like the neighbor, then we
right.
love them, right?
Right,
Or you have a community pool, right? And the doggone short-term rental people are having all crowded, and I know I've had people complain about that, where they use the community pool as a as
oh,
a
wow, yeah.
as a
Mhm.
marketing tool. So they take a picture of the pool, and you're like, oh, I got this pool, and it's not really your pool, but it's a community pool. But then you
Right.
have all these, yeah. So this party going on there. So it's
Oh, yeah, I
interesting.
can see
So
that. Yeah, they would strongly object to that. Right.
right. Yeah. So anyway, so we have our meeting tomorrow, which is going to be talking about how you actually analyze. It's called deal or no deal. So how you actually analyze opportunities, and one of the things we do is it's primarily flips, but because we migrated away from a lot of rentals just because of the price points. But one of the things we want to do is we actually have a calculator. We put this in, and to show what will it look like if we did rent it or we did have a revenue model to get it profitable. So we actually have those calculators that we're starting to
Oh,
develop.
good. Yeah,
Yeah, because it's all about the numbers, right? So
that's
if,
right.
if you still want to buy and hold, what do you have to do to make it work? And so that's kind of the scenarios we're looking at, because if not, all of us, we're going to be either fixing flippers right?
Well, what
Or
about owner financers?
owner financer. So that's the next thing. So
Yeah,
that's really where it is. It's in the notes right now.
right.
It's definitely there. So, and that's what we're going to talk about the sub twos too. We're going
Yeah,
to do another one on sub twos in the documents. But anyway, so really good stuff, Gaylene. Thank you very much. I think we just wanted to highlight this and talk about, even though they're putting restrictions, it's probably going to be widespread. Let's look at the ways that we can actually do things that are successful. And we'll have a counter to this. I'm going to reach out to some of my friends and hopefully you will too to see, over time, once they put this in place, it's starting, how people are actually surviving or what they're doing.
right,
Um, because I always want to be the opposite too, right? I always want to be the offensive person. So once you say something, I'm like, okay, well, then what can we do?
right,
Right.
exactly.
So
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This is really a pretty fascinating topic, and like I said, it's there's going to be a lot of activity, one way or the other, over the next, couple of years at least. So um, I'll be watching as well.
that's awesome. So again, that's Gaylene Rogers with the Lonergan Law Firm. Wonderful. We're going to have a lot of different topics that we're going to be discussing here in the near future. And I'm Joe Boston with the Dallas Real Estate Investment Group. We're going to also have guests that talk about the myriad of things, but a lot of it's going to be like this to highlight what's going on in our communities and our areas. And we're seeing people chime in from different areas, which I really like because typically with the government, just like we're talking about, if it's not just happening here, it's going to happen everywhere. They're trying to regulate as much as possible to get paid. So, I appreciate people that are jumping on. So it's really, really cool to see that. So, with that being said, we will tune out, but I want to thank everybody for watching us here at Real Estate for Life. Definitely tune in. Anything we can do to help you grow your real estate business, reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help. So, until next time, we'll be talking to you soon.
Bye bye.